I never thought a simple question could break me. That afternoon, as the sun was dipping behind the oak trees in our neighborhood, my father looked at me and asked softly, "Baby, where's your car?" I felt my throat close. Because how do you tell your own daddy, the man who taught you to drive on an old dirt road in Georgia, the man who told you never let anyone take your independence, that your husband and his mother have been pressuring you, pushing you, cornering you, until you don't even recognize your own life anymore? I stood there in his doorway, 62 years old, my hands shaking like I was a child again. All those months of being told I was too old to drive, that a woman my age didn't need freedom, that they'd take care of everything if I would just hand over the keys. They all crashed into me at once. I wanted to hide. But my father's eyes, steady, strong, tired from a lifetime of truths, wouldn't let me. That was the moment I realized what they took wasn't just my car. They were trying to take me. And that was the day everything started to change. I used to think betrayal came quietly, in whispers, in half-truths, in little disappointments you learn to ignore. But that day, standing in my own living room, it walked right up to me, bold as daylight, and took something that felt bigger than a car. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, the kind of afternoon where sunlight slips through the blinds and paints soft lines on the carpet, where everything feels too calm for anything bad to happen. I had just finished brewing a pot of peppermint tea when I heard footsteps, 2 sets, marching down the hallway like they had already made a decision without me. Marcus, my husband, walked in first. His shoulders were stiff, jaw tight, eyes avoiding mine. Behind him came his mother, Lorraine, holding my car keys between 2 fingers like she had picked them up with a pair of tongs. She didn't even say hello, just lifted the keys and smiled that smile she always wears before she's about to hurt someone and call it love. "Good news," she announced. "Marcus and I talked this morning, and we've decided you shouldn't be driving anymore." I blinked. There was no soft landing, no gentle introduction, no concern. Just a decree, delivered like I was some elderly stranger who wandered into their house. Lorraine stepped closer, lowering her voice as if she were doing me a kindness. "It's not safe for a woman your age to be behind the wheel. We're looking out for you." Looking out for me. Funny how people love to use that phrase right before they take something that belongs to you. Marcus finally spoke, barely above a whisper. "We already found a buyer. He's ready today. We just need your signature." Signature. Buyer. Today. My heartbeat grew louder than the clock on the wall. I steadied myself on the table. "You sold my car?" Lorraine laughed. Not a joyful laugh, one of those condescending, pitying laughs that stick to your skin. "No, sweetheart, we're helping you. That car's too much responsibility for you now. You should be grateful we're stepping in before something happens." I'm 62, not 92. I don't forget where I am. I don't confuse the brakes with the gas. I drive to church, the grocery store, my quilting group on Thursdays. I am not helpless. But that didn't matter to them. She reached inside my purse, without asking, pulled out my driver's license and held it up to the light. "Honestly," she said, smirking, "I don't know why the DMV keeps renewing these at your age." Marcus flinched but still said nothing. My cheeks burned. The living room suddenly felt too small, too bright, and for the first time in a long time I felt old, not because of my body, but because someone wanted me to feel that way. Lorraine laid a contract on the coffee table, a thick one. "The buyer is coming at 4, she said. "We're making this easy. Just sign." Just sign. As if I were a minor, as if everything I worked for, everything I owned belonged to them. I looked at Marcus, my husband, searching his face for some kind of resistance, some sign he realized this was wrong, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. Instead, he said, "Mom's right. It's for the best. You've been forgetting things lately." Forgetting things? I stared at him. "What exactly have I forgotten, Marcus?" Silence. He had no answer, because it wasn't true. It never was. Lorraine stepped between us, blocking my view of him. "You don't need to get defensive. We're trying to keep the family safe." The family, meaning them. Because nothing about this was concern for me. I sank onto the couch, not because I was agreeing, but because betrayal has weight. Thick, heavy weight that sits on your chest and makes every breath feel like work. Lorraine placed a pen in my hand. "There you go. Just sign at the bottom." The pen felt cold. My fingers shook, but not out of confusion. Out of anger, out of clarity. This wasn't about safety. It wasn't about age. It wasn't even about the car. It was about control. They wanted my freedom piece by piece. They wanted me to shrink, to become small enough for them to manage, to hand over everything I worked for just because they decided I didn't deserve it anymore. I looked at Marcus again. Why are you doing this to me? He swallowed hard, then said the words that hollowed something inside me. Because Mom says it's time. Time. As if I were an appliance reaching the end of its warranty. As if my worth could be stamped with an expiration date. Lorraine sighed dramatically. Let's not make this emotional. You're becoming a burden and we're stepping up as a family should. That word, burden, hit me deeper than any insult has ever hit me. A burden. After decades of working, saving, helping, loving, standing by their side, this is what I had become in their eyes. The afternoon light shifted, landing on my empty key hook by the door. A small, ordinary thing, but seeing it bare felt like watching a part of my independence bleed out. I put the pen down slowly. I'm not signing anything. Lorraine's face hardened immediately. Her sweetness cracked like cheap paint. Marcus stepped forward. If you don't sign, you're going to force us to take other measures. Other measures. A threat. In my own home. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. Something inside me went still, a quiet, heavy stillness that only comes when you realize the people you trusted most are willing to strip away your dignity to make their own lives easier. And in that stillness, one truth rose above everything else. They weren't protecting me. They were dismantling me, piece by piece, and they expected me to thank them for it. People always assume a woman my age just ended up where she is. They never see the roads she's walked, the hands she's held, the weight she's carried for people who barely remember to say thank you. And maybe that's why my husband and his mother thought they could take my car, because they forgot the years that came before the easy parts of their lives. Long before Marcus and his mother decided I was a burden, I was the one holding everything together. I remember working double shifts in my 30s, back when Marcus and I were renting a small one-bedroom near Jackson Street. I cleaned offices overnight and worked mornings at a bakery, not because I loved the smell of yeast and sugar, but because we needed the health insurance. I used to come home with my feet swollen, my back screaming, but I never complained. Back then, I believed that building a life meant putting your head down and giving what you had. Marcus was just starting at the auto shop then. He didn't make much, but I encouraged him, told him it would pay off. You're good with engines, I'd say. You just need time. And time was something I gave him in buckets. There was a winter when the heater broke. I wrapped myself in 3 blankets and slept on the couch so he could rest near the space heater we borrowed from a neighbor. The cold made my bones ache for weeks, but he never knew. I didn't tell him. That's what love meant to me, choosing someone else's comfort over your own without keeping score. But keeping score isn't the same as remembering. And they, Marcus and his mother, forgot everything. When Marcus's grandmother got sick, it was me who drove Lorraine back and forth to the nursing home 3 times a week. She never said thank you. She just assumed I would do it because that's what daughters-in-law are for. Daughter-in-law. But she never once treated me like family. There were months when Marcus's hours were cut, and we struggled to pay rent. I picked up temp jobs, cleaning hotel rooms, answering phones at a plumbing company, even babysitting a neighbor's 3 boys who had more energy than the sun itself. I would come home exhausted, barely able to lift my arms, but I always put food on the table. Always. And when Marcus finally got promoted and money got easier, his mother praised him. Marcus worked so hard for this family, she said at every holiday dinner. Not you both, not the 2 of you, just him. As if I weren't sitting right there with the calluses to prove otherwise. Then came the house. The little 2-bedroom we saved for 6 years to buy. I was the one who found it, negotiated the price, filled out the paperwork, and pushed the realtor when she dragged her feet. Marcus didn't like dealing with forms, so I handled everything. Lorraine bragged about her son buying a house, never mentioning that it was my credit score, my persistence, and my savings that carried the entire process. But I didn't correct her. I thought peace was more important than pride. I remember the day Marcus cried because the bank almost denied our loan after one of his credit cards went into collections. He sat on the edge of the bed, head in his hands, whispering, I messed everything up. I didn't yell. I didn't blame him. I took a deep breath, called the bank, called the credit card company, negotiated the debt, and paid the overdue amount with the little emergency fund I had been building in a jar under the sink. He never asked where the money came from. He never asked how long it took me to save it. He just said, "You're the best," kissed my cheek, and moved on with his day. And I let him. Because that's what I did. I saved us quietly. In his mother's eyes, he was the hero. In ours, I was the foundation. But foundations don't get applause. They just get stepped on. As the years went by, little things started shifting. Lorraine began making comments about age even when I was only in my mid-50s. "You shouldn't be lifting that. You're getting older, you know. You need to think about slowing down." Slowing down? I had never slowed down in my life. Every time their world cracked, I was there with tape and glue. When Marcus's father died, it was me sitting in hospital, waiting rooms for hours. Me driving Lorraine to appointments. Me planning the funeral because everyone else was too emotional. But when the will was read, who did she thank? Her son. Always her son. And then came the biggest sacrifice of all. The car. Not the one they tried to take. The one before that. When Marcus's shop cut his hours again 2 years ago, we only had one reliable car between us. His truck had been sputtering for months. He needed transportation to work, and I couldn't let him lose his job. So I sold my sedan, the one I had paid for myself every last dollar, and bought the cheaper used car I drive now. I didn't regret it. Not then. I believed marriage was a partnership. I believed what I gave would come back. But sitting there in my living room, listening to Lorraine call me a burden while holding the keys to the car I sacrificed so much for, all those years of giving without asking for anything in return came rushing back like a wave that had been waiting its whole life to crash. For the first time, I saw my sacrifices for what they truly were. Not love they appreciated, not devotion they valued, but conveniences they expected. Every ride I drove, every bill I paid, every shift I worked, every time I held the pieces together, they had taken it all as proof that I didn't need anything. Not respect, not autonomy, not even the basic dignity of keeping my own car. And that realization cut deeper than any insult, because betrayal doesn't always feel like someone breaking a promise. Sometimes, it feels like they never saw your worth in the first place. That night, after the confrontation in the living room, the house felt colder than winter roads in February. Not because the thermostat was low, but because something inside me had gone numb. So numb I could barely feel the weight of my own body as I walked down the hallway. Marcus and Lorraine had retreated to the kitchen, whispering like conspirators. Every soft hiss of their voices felt like a needle pricking the back of my neck. I shut my bedroom door quietly, not to keep the noise out, to keep myself from falling apart in front of them. The room looked the same as every night. The candles on my dresser, the quilt my grandmother stitched, the framed photo of me and Marcus back when we used to smile without trying. But something about it all felt foreign, like I had stepped into the life of another woman. A woman who still believed she mattered in her own home. My legs finally gave out, and I sank onto the edge of the bed. The light from the hallway spilled beneath the door, thin and pale. I stared at it for a long time, breathing slowly, trying not to collapse beneath the truth I could no longer ignore. They didn't see me. Not as a partner, not as a woman, not as a human being with rights and needs of her own. They saw me as support, a service, a convenience, a resource. I reached down and opened the drawer next to my bed. Inside was a small leather-bound journal I had kept for years. Not for secrets, but for sanity. I flipped it open, and an old entry caught my eye. "Remember who you were before the world asked you to be everything to everyone?" I read it twice. It felt like a stranger had written it to me. A lump rose in my throat. I had spent so many years being everything for everyone else. The helper, the fixer, the steady one, the forgiving one, that I had forgotten what it felt like to be the one who needed something. Tonight I needed something. I needed someone to hold me, to stand beside me, to fight for me. But no one came. The whispering in the kitchen grew louder. I couldn't hear the words, but I recognized the tone. Frustrated, impatient, plotting. At one point, Marcus said, just loud enough for me to hear through the thin walls, "She'll sign eventually. Mom always gets her way." Always gets her way. I closed my eyes and a single tear slid down my cheek. Not because of the words, but because of how effortless they sounded. My husband believed that. He believed that about me. He believed his mother had more power over my life than I did. I stood up, walked to the bathroom, and flicked on the light. The mirror reflected a woman with tired eyes and a face that held decades of quiet endurance. But beneath that, I saw something else. The faintest flicker of anger. A small, quivering flame that refused to die. I leaned closer, gripping the sink. "Who are you?" I whispered to my reflection. The woman staring back at me didn't answer, but she looked disappointed, not in Marcus, not in Lorraine, in me, because I had let them treat me like I was less. I turned off the light and sat on the bathroom floor, pulling my knees to my chest. The cool tile grounded me. For a while, I just breathed. Deep, slow, trembling breaths. By then, the whispering had stopped. The house was silent, the kind of silence that presses against your skin and makes you feel trapped. I thought about everything I had ever done for Marcus, everything I had ever swallowed from Lorraine, every time I had sacrificed myself thinking it would be worth it. But what good is sacrifice when the people you sacrifice for don't respect you? I reached for my phone. My father's number was on the screen before I even realized it, but I didn't call, not yet. I didn't want him to hear me like this, broken, trembling, unsure of who I even was. Instead, I opened the Photos app and scrolled back to pictures of me from years ago. There I was, smiling, driving, cooking, dancing with friends, laughing so hard my stomach hurt. I barely recognized that woman. Where had she gone? I pressed a hand to my chest. My heart felt heavy, a weight that had been building, not for hours, not for days, but for years. And then something inside me cracked, not like glass breaking, more like a dam that had been holding back too much water for too long. I cried. For the first time in a long time, I truly cried. Not quite tears, but deep, aching sobs from a place I didn't even know existed. I cried for the years I gave. I cried for the love I lost. I cried for the respect I never got. I cried for the woman I used to be before life carved pieces out of her. And when the tears finally stopped, I sat there in the dark, surrounded by silence. Until a thought whispered through the stillness, soft but sharp. When did I start trading pieces of myself for the privilege of being tolerated? The question struck me hard enough to shift something deep inside, because I knew this wasn't just about a car. It wasn't even about Marcus or Lorraine. It was about me, about the version of myself I had let fade, about the boundaries I never set, about the voice I stopped using. And in that moment, in that dim bathroom, something small but unmistakably powerful began to form. A decision, a promise, a spark. I stood up slowly, wiped my face, and looked into the mirror again. This time, the woman looking back at me wasn't disappointed. She was waking up. The next morning didn't feel like morning at all. It felt like the tail end of a storm, quiet, but only because everything inside me had already been shaken loose. I woke up earlier than usual, before the sun, before Marcus, before even the birds outside began rustling. My eyes were swollen, my throat raw, my spirit bruised. But there was something new beneath all that pain. A pulse, a tiny, steady rhythm of defiance. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening to the deep silence of the house. The kind of silence where every thought echoes a little too loudly, and then one thought rose to the top with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Today, something changes? I didn't fully know what that meant yet, but I knew it needed to start with me taking back something, anything that belonged to me. I slipped out of bed quietly, grabbed my robe, and stepped into the hallway. Marcus was still asleep. I could hear his soft snoring drifting from our bedroom. Lorraine hadn't arrived yet, thank God, because I needed space to breathe without her shadow stretching over everything. In the kitchen, the morning light was barely starting to peek through the curtains. I made myself a cup of coffee, strong, black, no sugar, and held the mug with both hands, letting the warmth seep into my fingers. It almost grounded me. Then my eyes fell on the hook by the door. The empty hook. The one where my car keys used to hang. That small piece of wall hit me harder than any argument ever could. I set the mug down. My heartbeat picked up. Something inside me stirred, a mix of anger, courage, and exhaustion so deep it turned into resolve. I walked to the living room, grabbed my purse, and checked for my wallet. Still there. Then another thought surfaced, quiet but powerful. If they want to take things from me, then I need to take things back. Even if it's small, even if it's subtle. I put on my shoes, slowly and deliberately, like each movement was a statement. When I opened the front door, the cold morning air rushed in, sharp and cleansing. It hit my face like a wake-up call. For the first time in a long time, I stepped outside without asking permission, without announcing it, without worrying who would question where I was going. I didn't have my car, but I had my feet, and that was enough. I walked down the street toward the bus stop, a place I hadn't stood in years. The pavement was cold under my shoes. The air brisk, but the walk felt good, solid. Like every step was stitching a piece of myself back together. When the bus pulled up, the driver gave me a familiar smile. "Haven't seen you in a while," he said. "Haven't seen me in a while," I echoed with a small, almost secretive smile. He didn't know how true that was. I took a seat by the window and watched the neighborhood sweep past. The trees, the houses. The world still turning, even when everything inside my home felt frozen. I wasn't going anywhere special, just downtown, to remind myself I could. I got off near a small coffee shop and walked inside. The smell of roasted beans and caramel wrapped around me like a hug. I ordered a pastry I hadn't treated myself to in years. I sat by the window, watching people live their lives, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. Not from sadness, but from something I hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind. The kind that feels like oxygen after being underwater too long. But the act wasn't complete yet. Because resistance isn't just about escape, it's about reclaiming something that was taken. So I walked to the bank. The building stood tall and glassy, glowing under the early morning sun. I hesitated a moment before pushing the door open, fear fluttering in my chest. But courage took the lead. Just enough to get me inside. A young teller greeted me with a bright smile. "How can I help you today, ma'am?" I slipped my ID across the counter. "I'd like to change the automatic withdrawals on my account," I said, my voice steady. She tapped at the keyboard. "Which ones?" I took a breath. "All of them." She looked surprised, but nodded. "And deactivate the joint access," I added. "My funds are personal." There it was. The first real, tangible reclaiming of power. For months, years even, money had been flowing quietly into shared expenses, favors, and emergencies that never quite belonged to me. But today, that stopped. The teller clicked, typed, verified, and printed. "Done," she said finally, sliding a stack of papers toward me. "You're the sole controller of your account now." Sole controller. The word sent a quiet tremor through me. As I signed the final form, something inside me lifted, light, fragile, but real. When I stepped back outside, the sun had fully risen, warm and golden. I pulled my coat tighter around me and breathed deeply, letting the air fill parts of me that had been empty for too long. It wasn't a war, not yet. But it was a spark, a crack in the walls they had been building around me. A message, maybe just to myself, that I was still here, still capable, still thinking, still choosing. On the bus ride home, I stared at my reflection in the window. Not the tired woman from the night before, but a woman who had taken the first step out of the darkness. A woman who wasn't done yet. When I walked through the front door, Marcus was in the kitchen, surprise flashing across his face. "Where were you?" he asked. I set my purse down slowly, evenly, with purpose. "Out," I said. Just one word. But in that moment, it felt like the most powerful word in the world. When I returned from the bank that morning, the house felt different, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Marcus stood at the kitchen counter with a bowl of cereal in his hands, but he wasn't eating. He was just staring at me, not with affection, not with concern, with confusion, with a hint of fear. "Where were you?" he asked again, this time more urgently. I hung up my coat with a slowness that was intentional. "I told you," I said. "I was out." His eyebrows pinched together. "Out where?" That little question, small, simple, revealed so much. Because it wasn't curiosity. It was expectation. He expected to know where I went, what I did, how I moved through the world, like I needed permission. I walked past him toward the sink to wash my hands. "You don't need to know everywhere I go," I replied. He stiffened. I saw it in the reflection of the window. His shoulders tightened, his jaw tensed, the cereal spoon in his hand frozen midair. That was the moment he realized something had changed. Not outside. Inside me. Before he could respond, the front door swung open and Lorraine stepped in, carrying her oversized purse and her oversized opinions like always. She spotted me instantly. "Oh, good, you're home. Marcus said you were sleeping in. We need to talk about the car paperwork. The buyer's coming back at noon." "No," I said. Just one word. Sharp, clear, solid as stone. Lorraine blinked. "Excuse me?" "I'm not selling my car." The silence that followed was almost comical, like someone had pressed pause on the whole room. Then Lorraine laughed, a brittle, high-pitched sound. "You don't have a choice, dear. The car's too much responsibility for you. We're taking care of things." I turned around fully to face her. "I didn't ask you to take care of anything." Marcus stepped forward, trying to assert control. "Can we not do this right now?" he said, voice tight. "Mom's trying to help." I looked at him, really looked at him, and something inside me clicked into place. They weren't afraid of losing me. They were afraid of losing control of me. Lorraine crossed her arms. "Well, if you're not signing, then we need to talk about your bank account. Marcus said you haven't made the usual transfers this month." Ah, there it was. Panic peeking through her voice like a thread slowly unraveling. I kept my face calm, my tone neutral. "I changed my automatic withdrawals." "What?" Marcus snapped. "I updated my banking access," I said. "It's my account, my decision." Lorraine's eyes widened, not with shock, but with insult. "You changed the transfers? Without discussing it with us?" "Discussing?" I tilted my head. "It's my money." Lorraine stepped closer, her voice lowering into that condescending whisper she used when she wanted to intimidate without appearing cruel. "You're making rash decisions. That's what concerns us. At your age?" "Stop." The word cut through the air like a blade. She froze. Marcus looked between us, his breathing uneven. "Mom's just saying—" "I know exactly what she's saying." Lorraine's voice sharpened. "You're acting unhinged, running around this morning, shutting off funds, refusing to sign what's best for the family." "The family?" I interrupted. "Or the two of you?" Marcus slammed the cereal bowl onto the counter, milk splashing. "Why are you being like this? Why are you making everything difficult?" I could have yelled. I could have cried. But I had done enough of that. Instead, I straightened my back and spoke quietly. "Because I woke up." He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He didn't have a response for that. Lorraine, however, was quicker. "This little stunt of yours isn't going to work," she snapped. "You need to put those withdrawals back. We have bills. Marcus has obligations. And I have mine. Don't," she hissed, "make me get the paperwork." There it was, the desperation finally showing its face. "What paperwork?" I asked, although I already knew. "The financial power of attorney forms Marcus brought home last night," she said proudly, like she had caught me in a trap. "We'll get them notarized today. If you're not capable of making sound decisions, I'm perfectly capable," I said. "You're proving you're not." Her voice rose, cracking through the room. Marcus rubbed his temples. "Mom, calm down." "No, she needs to hear this." Lorraine's eyes locked onto mine, hard and cold. "You're becoming unstable, and if you won't let us help you, we'll take the steps necessary to protect the household." Protect the household. A fancy way of saying, we're going to take everything. But something in her tone betrayed her. Fear. She was afraid. Afraid because the woman she expected to fold, obey, and apologize was suddenly standing tall. I let the silence hang for a moment, a deliberate moment. Then I said quietly, "You don't get to decide if I'm capable. You don't get to take my money. And you definitely don't get to take my car." Lorraine's mouth opened and closed like she was searching for an argument that wasn't there. Marcus stepped forward, palms out, trying to regain control. "Look, can we just talk about this rationally? You're acting—" I cut him off. "I'm acting like someone who finally sees what's been happening." The panic blossomed fully then, visible, raw, ugly. Lorraine tightened her grip on her purse. Marcus swallowed hard, sweat forming at his brow. They weren't used to this version of me. A version that didn't explain herself, didn't soften her tone, didn't apologize for existing. I took a single step toward the door, keys or no keys, just to show them I could. "You two can talk all you want," I said. "But my life, my choices, my freedom, those are not up for negotiation." And for the first time since this all began, they followed my movement, not the other way around. Panic. Pure, unmistakable panic. Because when someone who has always been quiet finally speaks, the people who depended on that silence don't know what to do. The thing about standing up for yourself at 62 is that it feels both powerful and terrifying at the same time. Powerful because you finally hear your own voice again. Terrifying because the people you stood up to aren't used to you having one. After the confrontation, the house settled into a strange, tense silence. Marcus kept pacing through the living room, pretending to scroll on his phone. Lorraine sat stiff on the couch, muttering under her breath about ungrateful women and family responsibilities. Every now and then, she glanced toward me, her expression tightening each time she realized I wasn't retreating the way she expected. But while they were unraveling, something inside me was solidifying. I needed space. I needed help. I needed someone whose voice didn't shake when speaking the truth. So I grabbed my jacket, slipped my purse over my shoulder, and walked out the front door without explaining a thing. I knew exactly where I was going. The bus ride across town was quiet, and for once the quiet felt comforting. Not like the suffocating silence of my home, but like the kind that gives you room to think. The city passed by in flashes, buses, storefronts, people with places to be, and somewhere between the third and fourth stop, my hands stopped shaking. I got off near a brick building with a blue awning that read, Hopewell Community Resource Center. Most people called it Hopewell. I simply called it my safe place. Years ago, after a rough patch in our marriage, I came here for a grief support group. Not because someone had died, but because a part of me had started disappearing, and I didn't know who to talk to about it. That was the first time I met Ms. Evelyn, a retired social worker with sharp eyes, a warm voice, and a presence that filled any room she entered. She once told me, "Baby, you don't come here for answers. You come here to remember you deserve them." Today I needed that more than ever. When I stepped inside, the scent of lemon disinfectant and old books hit me. The sound of a coffee machine hummed in the corner. And there she was, Ms. Evelyn, sorting pamphlets at the front desk. She looked up, saw me, and her eyes softened immediately. "Well, look who the wind blew in," she said. "Come here, sugar." I didn't realize how tightly I'd been holding myself until her arms wrapped around me. For the first time in 24 hours, I let my body lean, just for a second, into someone who wasn't trying to take anything from me. She pulled back and studied my face. "You're carrying something heavy," she said. "Sit. Tell me." I followed her to a small office with a round table and a lamp that always flickered like it was trying too hard. I sat down, took a breath, and the story spilled out. Not with drama, not with tears. Just truth. She listened without interrupting, without gasping, without judging. When I finished, she leaned back and sighed a long, slow sigh, the kind that says, "I've seen this before and you're not crazy." "Baby," she said gently, "what you're describing has a name." I swallowed. A name? Financial abuse, elder intimidation, coercive control. My breath caught. Hearing those words, real words, recognized words, felt like someone finally turned on a light in a room I'd been sitting in for years. "This is a pattern," she continued. "They isolate you, make you doubt yourself, control your access to money, transportation, independence, and they wrap it up in, 'We're doing what's best for you.'" My stomach tightened. That phrase, those exact tactics. She was naming everything I couldn't. "Listen," Ms. Evelyn said, leaning in, her voice soft but strong. "You're not losing your mind. They're trying to rewrite your reality to match their convenience." I looked away, blinking hard. I didn't want to cry again, not here, not now. But it wasn't sadness pulling at my chest. It was relief. Relief that someone else saw it, named it, understood it. She continued, "You need protection and documentation." "Documentation?" I asked. She nodded. "Baby, you need a record of their behavior. Texts, emails, any messages where they pressure you. And you need to talk to a lawyer who specializes in elder rights." Elder rights. I never thought I'd need something like that. But here I was. Ms. Evelyn pulled out a small notebook from her drawer. "Start writing everything down, dates, words, actions. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to be written." I took the notebook in my hands. It felt heavier than it looked. "And one more thing," she added, "you're not alone. You have a right to protect your independence, your safety, your dignity." The word dignity hit me the hardest. I had been losing mine so slowly, so quietly, I didn't even notice until I was fighting to breathe. She squeezed my hand. "You came here today because something in you woke up. Don't put that back to sleep." I nodded, slowly, but with a certainty building in my chest. "I won't." "Good," she said. "Now go back home with a straight spine and a knowing smile. They'll feel it. Trust me." And she was right. Walking back into the house that afternoon, I didn't feel scared. I didn't feel small. I didn't feel confused. I felt prepared. Marcus looked up from the couch, worry etched across his face. Lorraine stood near the dining table, clutching a stack of papers like she was ready for battle. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten them. I didn't explain my whereabouts. I simply walked past them, placed Ms. Evelyn's notebook on the kitchen counter, and said in a calm, clear voice, "I know what this is now." They froze, and I'm done pretending I don't. Their panic wasn't just beginning anymore. It was unfolding. I used to believe that when you finally stood up for yourself, people would pause, maybe reflect, maybe even apologize. But I learned something far more truthful. When you stop being easy to control, the people who depended on your silence don't soften. They strike back. And Marcus and Lorraine, they didn't just strike back. They escalated. It started that same evening. Lorraine had been pacing the living room for almost an hour, her heels clacking sharply against the hardwood like she was marching across a battlefield. Marcus sat on the couch with his head in his hands, but every now and then he'd look up at me with this mixture of shock and irritation, like he still couldn't believe I had the nerve to tell them no. I was in the dining room writing in Miss Evelyn's notebook, quiet, steady, documenting every word that mattered. And that was what set Lorraine off. She snapped, "What exactly are you writing down over there?" I didn't look up. "Things I need to remember." "Well, that's concerning," she said. "Since when do you need notes to keep track of conversations?" I lifted my eyes slowly, meeting hers. Since conversations started feeling like traps. It was the truth, and she felt it. Her face tightened. "You're being dramatic," she said, voice shaking with indignation. "Marcus, talk to her." But Marcus looked uneasy. He hesitated before speaking. "Mom, maybe we should just take a breath." Lorraine whipped around, furious. "A breath? Your wife is spiraling and you want to take a breath?" My pen didn't stop moving. I wrote it down. Spiraling. And she noticed. That was the moment her panic ignited into something uglier. Strategy. She straightened her blouse, took a deep breath, and said in the tone she used when she wanted to manipulate without appearing cruel, "Well, if you won't sign the car papers, then you leave us no choice." I capped my pen and waited. "You need an evaluation," she said matter-of-factly. I blinked. "An evaluation?" "A cognitive screening," she clarified, "just to make sure you're thinking clearly. At your age, these things happen." Marcus swallowed hard. "Mom, no, Marcus," she said sharply. "If she refuses to cooperate, we need proof she's not losing her mind." My heart slammed so hard it felt like it bruised my ribs. Not because I believed her, but because I realized how far she was willing to go. "A screening?" I repeated. "For what reason?" Lorraine's smile was sweet poison. "To protect you, dear." But her eyes gave her away. This wasn't about my health. It was about power. About taking the wheel back, literally and figuratively. I felt it in my bones. They were preparing to paint me as unstable. "Let me be clear," I said quietly. "There's nothing wrong with my mind." "I disagree," she shot back. "Healthy people don't sabotage their family finances." Family finances. She really believed my money was communal, that my independence was negotiable. She continued, "And refusing help is a sign of cognitive decline." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictably desperate. Then she played her next card. "I spoke with someone today," she added, voice dripping with self-importance. "A family attorney. He said if we're worried, we can request temporary guardianship until you're evaluated." I stared at her. They had thought this through. They had discussed it, planned it, before I even walked through the door. Guardianship. As if I were a child. As if I couldn't think, choose, or protect myself. Marcus stood, trying to look authoritative, but the guilt in his eyes made him falter. "This isn't an attack," he said. "We just need to be sure you're okay." I took a slow breath. "So you want a doctor to declare whether I'm fit to make my own decisions?" Lorraine lifted her chin. "Yes. And if you refuse, that tells us, and the court, everything we need to know." There it was, the threat fully unmasked. I could feel anger rising, hot and righteous, but I held it down. I remembered what Miss Evelyn told me. Stay calm. Calm is your power. So I sat back in my chair, opened my notebook, and wrote every word they said. Deliberate, visible, unapologetic. Lorraine's voice shook. You're not writing this down. Oh, I said, I absolutely am. Marcus took a step toward me. Why are you doing that? Because you both need to hear yourselves. Silence, heavy, sharp, accusatory. Then Lorraine made her final move, the one she thought would break me. If you don't cooperate, she said, we'll bring someone from Adult Protective Services to do a wellness check. They take these situations seriously. I stopped writing. That one hit. Not because I believed I'd lose, but because I knew how frightening that process could be for someone my age. A wellness check meant strangers in my home. It meant questions. It meant being treated like I couldn't take care of myself. I closed the notebook gently and stood. Do what you think you need to do, I said. Lorraine's eyes widened. She expected fear, begging, compliance. Instead, she got calm. But understand, I added, you're not the only ones who have spoken to a professional today. Marcus froze. Lorraine's mouth twitched. And if you bring anyone into this house, I continued, I'll be ready with documentation, dates, and names. Everything you've said. Everything you've done. The silence that followed wasn't just tension, it was fear. Their fear. Because they realized something vital. They weren't the only ones with a strategy anymore. That night, I heard them whispering again, their voices trembling beneath the surface like a storm they couldn't contain. They thought they were building a case against me, but what they didn't know was this. I had already started building mine, and mine was grounded in truth, not desperation. That night, after their threats and whispered plotting, I lay in bed wide awake, not scared, alert, aware. My body was tired, but my mind was sharp for the first time in years. I kept hearing Ms. Evelyn's voice in my head. Document everything. Build a record. Truth needs proof. So when the house finally settled into silence, Marcus asleep in our room, Lorraine snoring lightly in the guest room, I slipped out of bed, went to the dining table, and opened the notebook again. The lamp cast a soft glow as I wrote. Time, words, actions, threats, patterns. Every sentence felt like reclaiming something they had tried to take. My memory, my clarity, my voice. By the time I finished, the pages were full. Not with emotion, not with dramatic interpretations, just facts. Cold, simple, undeniable facts. For years I had been alone with the truth. Now the truth had backup. The next morning I woke up early and dressed with a purpose. Nothing fancy, just a clean blouse, pressed slacks, and the small silver earrings my father gave me as a graduation gift. I looked in the mirror and saw something new in my eyes. Steadiness. Lorraine was already in the kitchen, brewing coffee loud enough for the whole block to hear. Marcus sat at the table scrolling on his phone, glancing up nervously every few seconds. I greeted them calmly. Good morning. They both froze, as if politeness were the most threatening weapon I could wield. Lorraine sniffed. We need to revisit yesterday's discussion. I'm busy today, I replied. We can talk later. Busy with what? She demanded. But I didn't answer. Not because I owed them nothing, because their entitlement didn't deserve an explanation. I grabbed my purse and walked out the door. I headed straight back to Hopewell Community Resource Center. This time, I wasn't looking for comfort. I was looking for structure, guidance, strategy. Ms. Evelyn waved me into the office before I even knocked. You came back quick, she said with a knowing grin. Things got worse, I replied. Good, she said. And when she saw my confusion, she added, worse means the mask is slipping. That's when you can collect the clearest truth. I handed her the notebook. She flipped through the pages, nodding slowly as she read. This, she said, tapping one entry, is coercion. This is intimidation. This is attempted financial control. You're doing exactly what you need to do. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was overreacting. I felt prepared. Now, she continued, it's time for the next step. What's that? People. I frowned. People? She nodded. You need community around you. Abusive dynamics thrive in isolation. They lose power when the victim has witnesses, support, eyes and ears that they can't manipulate. I felt a nervous flutter in my chest. I don't want to drag anyone into this. Baby, she said gently, you're not dragging them, you're inviting them. There's a difference. Before I could respond, she picked up her phone. I want you to attend the women's circle today. It meets at noon. I'm not sure I'm ready. You are, she said firmly. And if you aren't, that's even more reason to go. The women's circle met in a small room with mismatched chairs arranged like a warm, imperfect embrace. There were about 10 women, some older, some younger, but all of them looked like they had stories carved into their bones. When I walked in, they smiled, real smiles, welcoming smiles. Ms. Evelyn introduced me. This is a sister who's remembering her strength. And somehow, those words didn't embarrass me. They steadied me. The meeting began with gentle check-ins, each woman sharing a weight she'd been carrying. A toxic ex-husband, a controlling adult daughter, a manipulative sibling, a son who only called when he needed money. Different stories, same roots. Then it was my turn. I didn't mean to share much. But once I opened my mouth, the truth rolled out smooth and clear, like it had been waiting for this moment. I told them about the car, the pressure, the threats, the manipulation dressed up as care. They listened with stillness, with knowing nods, with eyes that said, "You're not alone." When I finished, a silence filled the room, warm, heavy, understanding. Then one woman, Ms. Joanne, leaned forward. She was in her 70s, silver hair and perfect curls. "Baby," she said, that's not family love. That's family greed." Another woman spoke up. "They're trying to make you dependent so they can take your assets." Someone else added, "That's how guardianship abuse starts." Each sentence felt like a puzzle piece clicking into place. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't exaggerating. I wasn't losing my mind. This was a pattern. A recognizable, documented pattern of elder financial abuse. And now other people recognized it too. We spent the next hour going through steps, practical ones. Start a separate email for anything legal or financial. Change your passwords. Inform one trusted person each day about what's happening. Stay consistent with your documentation. Do not sign anything, ever. By the end, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Armor. Not the kind you wear to war, but the kind that grows from being surrounded by people who see you, really see you, and want you to stay standing. As we wrapped up, Ms. Evelyn placed a hand on my shoulder. "Next step," she said, "is a lawyer. I'll give you 3 names. Choose one. Meet them this week. Build your file." "Do you think I'll need one?" I asked. She smiled softly. "You already do." When I walked home that afternoon, the winter wind was sharp, but I didn't feel cold. I felt fortified. The moment I stepped through the door, I saw Marcus and Lorraine both turn to look at me, like they were waiting, like they were trying to read whether I'd broken or bent. But instead I walked right past them, calm and unbothered, and placed a new folder on the kitchen counter labeled Documentation. Do not touch. Their eyes widened, because they weren't the only ones preparing anymore. And this time, I had an army behind me. There's a moment in every storm where the sky stops pretending, clouds stop holding themselves together, lightning stops hiding, and everything breaks open at once. That moment came for us on a Thursday afternoon, quiet, ordinary, unsuspecting, the kind of day where nothing should have happened. But storms don't ask permission. I came home from a meeting with one of the attorneys Ms. Evelyn recommended. The consultation had been calm, clear, empowering. He told me exactly what I needed to know: my rights, my protections, the laws on my side, the steps to take if things escalated. When I walked into the house, folder tucked under my arm, I felt steady, anchored, confident. But the moment the door closed behind me, I knew something was wrong. Lorraine was sitting on the couch, but her posture wasn't her usual stiff superiority. She was leaning forward, elbows on knees, hands wringing together. Her purse sat open beside her, paper spilling out like the aftermath of a hasty search. Marcus stood behind her, pacing in tight circles, his breathing uneven like someone had just delivered bad news. They both froze when I walked in. Lorraine lifted her head first, eyes full of something sharp. "There you are," she said. "We've been waiting." Her voice was brittle, strained even, not her usual control, not her usual confidence. Something had happened. Marcus's eyes flicked to the folder in my hand. "What's that?" I set it on the table without answering. He stepped closer. "Where were you?" There it was again. That question that used to make me shrink. But not today. "That's not your concern," I said quietly. Lorraine let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, it absolutely is our concern. Everything you do affects this family." I took my coat off, unbothered. No. What you do affects this family. What I do affects me. Marcus slammed his hand on the table. Stop talking like that. His voice cracked through the air, loud enough to rattle something inside me, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I turned to face him fully. Why are you yelling? He swallowed hard, twice, before answering. Because, he said, you've pushed us into a corner. The word sent a cold shiver down my spine. What corner? I asked. Lorraine reached into her purse and pulled out a paper, folded, creased, clearly handled too many times in too few hours. She held it up. This corner. I recognized it instantly. The financial guardianship petition. Already filled out. Already signed. By Marcus. My breath hitched, not out of fear, out of realization. They hadn't been threatening. They had been preparing. Lorraine smoothed the paper with her palm. We called the court liaison this morning, she said proudly. She's coming tomorrow to interview the household. Marcus didn't look at me. He stared at the floor like a child caught doing something shameful. I felt the room tilt, not because I was losing balance, but because I was gaining clarity. They weren't going to force me to sign anything. They were going to take everything by force. You filed this without talking to me? I asked quietly. Lorraine scoffed. You weren't being reasonable. Someone has to protect the assets. My skin went cold. The assets? Or your access to them? That hit her hard. Marcus finally met my eyes. You've changed, he said. You're acting paranoid. Writing things down, locking your phone, going out alone. Going out alone? I repeated slowly. You think that's a symptom? He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Lorraine cut in. It's dangerous for a woman your age to be wandering around unsupervised. Supervised? They actually said supervised. I took a slow, steady breath, the kind Miss Evelyn taught me, then picked up the guardianship petition from the table. I read every line silently as they watched, waiting for me to break. The lies, the exaggerations, the carefully crafted narrative of concern. When I finished, I folded the paper neatly and placed it back on the table. Then I spoke. Okay, I said calmly. They blinked. Okay, Marcus repeated. Yes, I said. If you want a house visit from the court liaison tomorrow, then we'll have one. Lorraine's lips curled. So you're finally cooperating. No, I said, I'm prepared. For the first time, she looked unsure. I walked into the kitchen, grabbed the folder from my attorney, and placed it on the table right beside their petition. Marcus frowned. What's that? My documentation, I said. My legal consultation notes, my financial logs, my communication record, the timeline of coercive behavior I've documented, the witnesses I've spoken to, the professionals who are on my side. Lorraine's face went pale. You talk to people? Yes, I said, voice steady as granite. I built my case. Marcus ran a hand through his hair. What case? Against who? I looked at him, long enough for the truth to sink in. You know who. Silence flooded the room. Thick, heavy, unavoidable. Lorraine stood, but her knees wobbled slightly. You're making a mistake, she hissed. No, I replied. I made one for years. Staying quiet. Marcus's voice cracked. Why are you doing this to us? I shook my head. No, Marcus. The real question is, why did you think you could do this to me? He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Then I delivered the final blow, the one that turned their panic into full-blown fear. I've already spoken with the attorney, and I've already scheduled my own meeting with the court liaison. Lorraine staggered. You... what? I called her myself, I said, so when she arrives tomorrow, she won't be hearing just your story. The room cracked open, not with sound, but with the weight of their realization. They had triggered a battle, but I wasn't the fragile woman they expected to walk into it. I was the prepared one, the steady one, the one with the truth. And now, the proof. The breaking point had come, but not for me, for them. The morning of the court liaison's visit, the house felt like a pressure cooker. The air was thick, heavy, and buzzing with the kind of nervous electricity you can feel on your skin. Marcus was pacing so hard the floorboards practically begged for mercy. Lorraine kept rearranging the same stack of papers on the dining table, smooth, straighten, shuffle, repeat, as if perfect alignment could hide the chaos underneath. But me? I sat at the kitchen counter sipping tea, calm, quiet, prepared. The contrast alone made Lorraine's eye twitch every few seconds. At 10:03 a.m., the doorbell rang. The moment echoed through the house like a drumbeat. Marcus nearly tripped rushing to the door. Lorraine fixed her blouse so fast she almost tore a button. I simply stood and folded my notebook under my arm. Marcus opened the door and stiffened. There stood Ms. Carmichael, the court liaison, mid-50s, tall, neatly dressed, with an expression that could read a room before she ever stepped into it. She held a clipboard and wore a badge clipped neatly to her jacket. "Good morning," she said warmly. Lorraine rushed forward with a hand extended, dripping faux sweetness. "Oh, Ms. Carmichael, you must be here for our wellness check. Thank you for coming on such short notice." Ms. Carmichael smiled politely, but she didn't shake Lorraine's hand. Instead, she looked past her, straight at me. "Mrs. Brooks," she said to me, "we spoke on the phone yesterday." Lorraine froze mid-gesture. Marcus blinked like someone had just hit pause on his brain. I stepped forward calmly. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for coming." The shift was immediate. Ms. Carmichael's gaze softened as she addressed me. Not them. Lorraine quickly recovered and forced a laugh. "Well, I suppose we all spoke to you yesterday. A busy day, wasn't it?" But Ms. Carmichael didn't play along. She simply said, "Let's begin with Mrs. Brooks. This is her evaluation." Lorraine's face fell. Marcus looked stunned. They had expected to be the narrators, but the narrative wasn't theirs anymore. Ms. Carmichael asked to speak with me privately first. We stepped into the kitchen, where sunlight poured across the table. She sat across from me, folded her hands neatly, and smiled. "You sounded very clear when we spoke," she said, "but I'd like to hear everything again in your own words." My voice didn't shake. Not once. I told her what had happened over the past weeks. The pressure, the threats, the manipulation, the attempts to take my car, the push for guardianship, the financial interference. I didn't add emotion. I didn't embellish. I just gave the truth clean and unvarnished. Then I handed her the folder from my attorney. Her eyebrows lifted as she flipped through the pages. "Detailed documentation," she said, impressed. "Dates, times, direct quotes. You've been very thorough." I nodded. I was advised to be. And wisely so. She continued reviewing, my personal account statements showing years of responsibility, my medical history proving competence, references from the women's circle, a written statement from Ms. Evelyn, the financial logs showing unusual withdrawals suggested by others. When she finished, she took a deep breath, almost relieved. "You are of completely sound mind," she said. "There's no cognitive concern here. None." A weight I didn't even know I was carrying lifted off my chest, but I didn't smile. Not yet, because it wasn't over. "Now," she said, "I need to speak with Marcus and his mother." I gestured toward the living room. "They're waiting." Oh, they were waiting all right. Waiting for a neatly scripted performance. But the performance cracked the moment she began asking questions. First, she asked Marcus to explain why he filed for guardianship. His voice wobbled with every sentence. "She's been different," he said. "Secretive, withdrawn, making decisions without discussing them." Miss Carmichael jotted notes calmly. "Can you give me specific examples?" Marcus blinked. "Well, she's been going out alone." Ms. Carmichael glanced up. "At 62, that's quite normal. Anything else?" He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Well, she's writing everything down." The silence that followed was priceless. Miss Carmichael stared at him. Documentation is not a symptom of cognitive decline. It's a sign of awareness and self-protection. Lorraine jumped in, her voice sharp. "She's unstable. She's refusing help. She's jeopardizing the family finances." "And what finances are those?" Ms. Carmichael asked smoothly. "Are you referring to joint accounts?" Lorraine hesitated. "Well, no." "Shared property?" "No." "Mutual assets?" Silence. Then, "It's complicated." "It doesn't seem complicated," Ms. Carmichael said. "It sounds like you're referring to her personal income." Lorraine's lips thinned. Marcus looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. Ms. Carmichael continued, "Tell me more about this instability. What specific behaviors concern you?" Again, nothing. No examples, no evidence, no coherent reasoning, just vague accusations, empty phrases, and nervous glances between them. It was the unraveling, slow, painful, public. Then Ms. Carmichael asked the question that broke the entire charade. "Did either of you pressure her to sign over her vehicle?" Lorraine sputtered. "That car is a hazard. Yes or no?" Marcus swallowed. "We suggested she shouldn't have it." "Suggested," Ms. Carmichael repeated calmly. "Or insisted." Lorraine's voice cracked. "We did what was necessary." There it was. The admission. Out loud. In front of a legal witness. Ms. Carmichael closed her notebook. "I've heard enough." She gathered her papers, thanked us, and asked me to walk her to the door. When we stepped outside, she lowered her voice. "You're not the one at risk here," she said, "and I'll be writing that in my report." I nodded, tears threatening to rise, but not from sadness, from validation, from being seen. She squeezed my arm gently. "You've done everything right. Keep your records, keep your boundaries, and don't let them intimidate you." I watched her leave, her figure shrinking down the walkway until she disappeared from view. When I went back inside, Marcus and Lorraine looked like deflated puppets, their strings cut, their performance over. No more script, no more control, no more superiority, just consequences. The unraveling had begun, and for the first time, it wasn't mine. It was theirs. The silence that filled the house after Ms. Carmichael left wasn't peaceful. It wasn't even tense. It was exposed. Like the air itself had peeled back the wallpaper and revealed mold beneath, ugly, festering, undeniable. Marcus sat on the couch, shoulders slumped, eyes unfocused. Lorraine stood near the dining table, gripping the back of a chair like she needed help staying upright. And I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and sat down like it was any ordinary afternoon. Calm, measured, unshaken. I didn't gloat. I didn't scold. I didn't say, "I told you so," even though the words would have been justified. I had learned something powerful. When you stop reacting, people start revealing. Marcus cleared his throat first. "So that didn't go the way we expected." I took a sip of water. "No," I said softly. "It didn't." Lorraine's voice cracked like thin glass. "She misunderstood the situation. She only heard your side." I looked up slowly. "She heard the truth," I replied, "and she heard exactly what she needed to." Lorraine gripped the chair harder. "You made us look irresponsible." "No," I said. "You did that yourselves." Marcus rubbed his face with both hands. "She said we pressured you. She said there was no basis for guardianship. She said—" "I know what she said," I interrupted calmly. I was listening. Something in my tone made him flinch. Not loud, not aggressive, just firm. A firmness he wasn't used to. Lorraine slammed her palm on the table. "This is ridiculous. She doesn't understand family dynamics." "Neither do you," I said. She froze. I continued, voice even. "Family doesn't control. Family doesn't isolate. Family doesn't manipulate finances or independence. Family doesn't take advantage of age or kindness." Each sentence landed like a stone dropped into still water. Marcus looked away, shame washing over his face. Then I placed my notebook in the legal folder onto the table. Deliberately, audibly. Lorraine jumped like she'd been slapped. "Are you trying to intimidate us now?" "No," I said. "I don't need to. The facts do that by themselves." She opened her mouth, but I raised a hand. "Sit down." She blinked, offended, but she sat. Marcus lowered himself into a chair, exhaling shakily. I looked at both of them, steady and unflinching. "I'm going to explain what happens next," I said. Neither of them spoke. "First," I began, "I will not be leaving this house. I will not be evaluated by any doctor you pick. I will not be surrendering my car, my bank accounts, or any aspect of my independence." Lorraine's mouth tightened. I continued. "Second, you will not file another guardianship petition. Not on my behalf, not behind my back, not ever again." Marcus swallowed hard. "And third," I said, pausing long enough for the words to settle, "if you attempt any kind of retaliation, financial, emotional, legal, or otherwise, I am fully prepared to involve my attorney." Lorraine's eyes narrowed. "You wouldn't dare." I would, I said, and I will. A long, heavy silence followed. Then Marcus spoke, his voice small. I didn't mean for it to get this far. I looked at him, really looked, and saw a man torn between guilt and fear. A man who had relied on his mother so long, he didn't know who he was without her influence. A man who had let weakness pass as loyalty. Marcus, I said gently but firmly, you let her convince you I was the enemy. His face crumpled. I don't know what I was thinking. You weren't thinking, I said. You were following. He closed his eyes as if the truth stung. Lorraine stepped forward, hands shaking. You've been twisting everything. I shook my head. No, I've simply stopped allowing it. She opened her mouth again, but I cut her off one last time. And just so we're clear, any further attempt to undermine my autonomy will result in legal consequences. Lorraine sat back, defeated in a way I had never seen before. Marcus ran a hand over his face. So, what happens now? I stood slowly, collecting my folder. What happens now, I said, is that things change. How? He asked, voice fragile. For starters, I said, your mother will no longer be staying here. Lorraine gasped like someone had shot her. Excuse me? You heard me, I said. This is my home, and I will not live under the same roof as someone who tried to declare me incompetent. Marcus's eyes widened. Where will she go? She has her own apartment, I said. She should use it. Lorraine sputtered. You can't throw me out. I'm family. Family, I said quietly, doesn't try to strip another family member of their rights. Her face went red, then pale, then red again. You have until Sunday, I added. 3 days? Marcus looked at me, anxious, conflicted, but he didn't argue. Because the truth was undeniable now. I wasn't the vulnerable one. They were. I moved toward the hallway, stopping only once to deliver the final line. And Marcus, we're going to counseling. He blinked. Counseling? Yes, I said, because if this marriage has any chance of surviving, you need to understand the difference between loyalty and control. He nodded slowly, broken, humbled, finally listening. Lorraine stood speechless, completely undone. The unraveling wasn't just public now, it was permanent. For the next 3 days, the house felt like the eye of a hurricane, strangely calm, deceptively quiet, but humming with tension just beneath the surface. Lorraine barely spoke to me. Marcus walked on eggshells, apologizing without words, unsure how to fix what he'd broken, but I wasn't angry anymore. Not in the way they expected. Anger had done its job already. It had woken me up. What I felt now was something steadier, something older, something like truth. Because once you reclaim your dignity, you don't give it back. On Sunday afternoon, Lorraine finally began packing. Not loudly, not dramatically, not with the righteous indignation she had always worn like perfume. Quietly, like a woman who finally understood there was no more ground beneath her feet. I watched her from the hallway as she folded sweaters into a suitcase. Her hands trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it. For a moment, I saw not the controlling mother-in-law who had made my life difficult for years, but an aging woman terrified of losing relevance, terrified of losing control, terrified of facing her own reflection without someone else to dominate. Human, flawed, but no longer my responsibility. She zipped her suitcase and turned toward me, her chin lifted, that old pride flickering back like a dying flame. I hope you're happy, she said coldly. I met her gaze steadily. I'm not happy you tried to take my independence, I replied, but I'm relieved to finally take it back. She pressed her lips together. You've poisoned my son against me. No, I said gently. You did that by trying to poison him against his own wife. And that was the closest thing to truth she'd heard in a long time. She didn't argue this time. She simply grabbed her purse, lifted the suitcase, and walked to the door. Marcus helped her load the trunk, his movements hollow. He came back inside afterward, shoulders slumped, eyes dim. I didn't think it would end like this, he murmured. I nodded. Things end when they need to end. He sat down at the kitchen table, head in his hands. I feel like everything is falling apart. I sat across from him. Things aren't falling apart, I said softly. They're finally falling into place. He looked up at me, childish, lost. And for a moment I remembered the man I married, hungry, hopeful, a little shy, grateful for my strength. Where had that man gone? When did he let his mother's voice replace his own? "We can fix this," he whispered, "can't we?" "Yes," I said, "but not by ignoring what happened." He swallowed hard. "We start counseling next week," I reminded him. He nodded. "I'll go. I'll do the work." Good. Because for the first time in a long time, he needed to. That evening, after Lorraine's car disappeared down the street, I stepped outside and breathed in the late afternoon air. The sky was pale blue, streaked with gold, the kind of sky that feels like forgiveness. Neighbors were out on their porches. Kids were riding bikes. Someone down the block was grilling ribs, the smell drifting lazily across the neighborhood. The world felt normal again, not because my problems were gone, but because I finally had the strength to face them on my own terms. After a moment, I walked to my car in the driveway, the car they tried to take. The sun glinted off the windshield, warm and reassuring. I opened the door, slid into the driver's seat, and rested my hands on the wheel. My car, my keys, my life. I didn't start the engine yet. Instead, I closed my eyes and let memories rise. The years of sacrifice, the nights of silence, the manipulations dressed as concern, the final breaking point. Then I let it all go. Not erased, released. When I opened my eyes again, I wasn't the woman they tried to shrink. I was the woman who grew anyway. I started the engine. The gentle rumble vibrated through me, familiar, grounding, free. I drove. Not far, just around the neighborhood. Slow, calm, windows down, wind touching my face like an old friend I hadn't seen in years. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt myself return. Not the wife, not the caregiver, not the woman being pressured into a corner. Just me, whole, steady, standing up straight inside my skin again. When I pulled back into the driveway, Marcus came outside. He looked unsure, like he didn't know whether to speak or stay quiet. "How was the drive?" he asked softly. I smiled, small, private. It felt good. He nodded. "I want you to know. I'm trying. I really am." "I know," I said, "and trying is the first step. But changing? That takes time." He exhaled shakily. "I'll earn your trust back." "We'll see," I said. Not a threat, not a promise, just truth. Because trust isn't given on demand. It's rebuilt brick by brick. He stepped back as I walked toward the house. But before I went inside, I paused and looked at him. "You need to understand something," I said. "My freedom is not negotiable. My independence is not optional. My dignity is not up for discussion." He nodded, tears gathering in his eyes. "I understand. And if you ever let anyone, family or not, convince you otherwise, you won't lose my trust next time." I held his gaze. "You'll lose me." A tear rolled down his cheek. "I won't let that happen." I nodded once, then walked inside. Slow, steady, powerful in a way that didn't need noise or fear or approval. Behind me, the door clicked shut. But inside me, something opened. A quiet freedom. Soft but vast, gentle but real, still but unshakable. The kind of freedom you don't announce. You live. It's been a few months since the day everything cracked open, and the house feels different now. Not perfect, not magically healed, but softer, quieter in a good way. Lorraine hasn't been back since she moved out, and honestly, the silence she left behind is the most peaceful gift she ever gave me. Marcus and I started counseling the week after she left. At first, he sat stiff and defensive, arms crossed like a shield. But somewhere between the second and third session, something in him broke. Not in a destructive way, but in a way that made room for honesty. One evening after a hard session, he said, "I didn't realize how much I let my mother think for me. I didn't realize how much that hurt you." And for the first time in a long time, I saw the man I married. Scared, flawed, trying, but willing to do the work. Healing isn't quick. It isn't pretty. It's slow, uncomfortable, and full of pauses you have to breathe your way through. But we're walking it. Together. Some days are easy. We cook dinner side by side, laughing over old stories, rediscovering the simple rhythm we used to have. Other days, the air feels fragile, like one wrong word could shatter everything again. But instead of burying it, we name it. We talk, we pause, we try again. And that, more than anything, feels like progress. A few weeks ago, Marcus handed me a small velvet box. Not jewelry, but a new key fob for my car. "I want you to know," he said, "your independence is part of who you are, and I never want to take that from you again." I didn't cry, but something warm settled in my chest, like a small fire lit gently back to life. Now, every Sunday, we take a short drive together, not because I need a companion, but because I choose one. We roll the windows down, let the breeze weave through the car, and talk about nothing and everything. Sometimes we don't talk at all. Sometimes silence feels like forgiveness. And one evening, as the sun sank low and the road stretched quiet before us, Marcus reached over and took my hand. "I'm learning," he said. "I hope it's not too late." I squeezed his fingers. "It's not about late," I said softly. "It's about steady." He nodded, slow, grateful, humbled. And as we drove home, the world glowing gold around us, I realized something. I didn't just fight for my freedom. I fought for a version of us that could finally breathe. And now, finally, we are.